My wife cheated and claimed marriage was only a contract, so I ended it with a cold revenge divorce that took away everything she valued. The living room was heavy, with tension, so thick it felt like the walls were closing in. Another argument, one of many, unfolded in the same exhausting cycle. But this time, I wasn't just frustrated. I was done. I needed to understand what we had become. "You don't even try anymore," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "It's like none of this matters to you." She barely looked up from her phone, exhaling sharply as if I were wasting her time. "Because it doesn't," she replied, "not in the way you think." Something in her tone made me pause. "What does that mean?" I asked. She finally met my eyes, her expression blank. "This marriage is just a contract." I didn't respond at first. I needed a moment to process whether I'd actually heard those words. A contract, not a partnership, not a bond built on love, but a transaction. Papers, signatures, obligations. "That's what you think?" I asked, forcing myself to stay composed. "That's all this is to you?" She shrugged, as if my reaction was over the top. "What else would it be? We have responsibilities, bills, household duties, maintaining appearances. That's what marriage is." "You're acting like I said something shocking." She really believed that. It wasn't a mistake or an emotional outburst in the heat of the moment. She meant every word. I should have been angry. I should have shouted, demanded, to know how long she had felt this way. Instead, I stood there, feeling something else entirely, clarity. For years, I had convinced myself that the distance between us was just a phase, that stress, routine, or life itself had created the emotional gap. I had told myself that love was still there, buried beneath the exhaustion, waiting to be revived. But that wasn't true, was it? She had never fought for this marriage because, to her, there was nothing worth fighting for. "Do you even love me?" I asked, knowing I wouldn't like the answer. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Why do you always ask these things? Love, feelings, passion, none of that is sustainable. People get married for stability, not fairy tales, stability." That was all I had ever been to her, a predictable constant, a provider. The realization settled deep, colder than I expected, and yet something inside me shifted. I nodded slowly. "All right," she frowned. "All right, what?" "You're right," I said, watching her reaction closely. "It is just a contract." She rolled her eyes. "Finally, you understand." I let out a breath, steadying myself. "Yeah," I said. "I understand perfectly." She thought she had won the argument, but she didn't realize something had changed in that moment. This wasn't just another fight we would sweep under the rug. This wasn't something I could unhear or pretend hadn't been said. If this was just a contract, then I was about to show her exactly how contracts end. I didn't bring it up again. I didn't argue or try to make her see how much damage she had done with those words. Instead, I let them settle, let them carve out every last illusion I had about our marriage. She thought I had finally accepted her version of reality, where love was a footnote and marriage was just a functional arrangement. In her mind, the argument was over. She had won. That was her mistake. If she was going to treat this like a contract, then I would too, and contracts can be terminated. I started with the basics, legalities, finances, obligations. I wasn't about to walk away blind, so the first thing I did was find a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in high-stakes divorces, someone who understood leverage, control, and how to ensure a clean break with minimal damage on my end. I didn't tell her, there was no point. I wanted her to believe nothing had changed, that I was still the predictable, accommodating man she had always known. At night, while she scrolled through her phone in bed, I reviewed bank statements, property deeds, and every financial document tied to our names. I mapped out every shared asset, every liability. I identified weak spots, accounts she had access to, expenses she had taken control over. I studied her spending patterns, her habits, her dependencies. She thought she had control over this marriage. That was about to change. I also made sure to watch her, really watch her. Now that I knew the truth, everything made sense. The way she deflected deep conversations, the way she dismissed intimacy like it was an unnecessary chore, the way she made decisions without ever considering how I felt. For years, I had made excuses for her, convincing myself that love could be expressed in different ways, that some people just weren't affectionate. But now I saw it for what it was. She had never truly cared, at least not in the way I had. One evening, she asked if I could pick up something on my way home from work, a simple request, a routine interaction. And yet, for the first time, I saw it for what it was, transactional. No warmth, no gratitude, just another obligation in the long list of tasks that made up her version of marriage. I did it, of course. I kept playing my part, but inside, I was already gone. I was no longer her husband. I was a man preparing to walk away. With my plan in motion, the facade of our life continued as if nothing had changed. The mundane rhythm of our days persisted. Meals shared in silence, weekends filled with obligatory errands, conversations limited to logistics and pleasantries. But with each passing day, my eyes were opened wider to the reality of what we had become. I started to examine the past with a new lens, dissecting moments that once seemed inconsequential, but now revealed the cold truth. There were countless evenings when I would initiate conversations about our future, our dreams, our life together. She would nod along, her eyes glazed over as if I were discussing the weather or the price of milk. When had my hopes and aspirations become so trivial to her? I remembered the nights I reached out for her, seeking the warmth and closeness that once defined us. Each time, her body would stiffen, her excuses rehearsed and mechanical. I'm tired, maybe tomorrow, it's not the right time. The bed became a physical manifestation of our growing emotional chasm, two people lying inches apart yet separated by miles of indifference. Holidays and anniversaries became formalities rather than celebrations. I would plan evenings out, buy thoughtful gifts, cook her favorite meals. In return, I would get a perfunctory thank you, or a distracted smile as she scrolled through her phone. The realization hit hard that these gestures, which I once believed nurtured our relationship, were nothing more than boxes to check off a list. I started noticing her demeanor when we were with friends or her family in public. She was charming, attentive, the perfect partner. She would laugh at my jokes, hold my hand, and lean into me as if we were still the couple everyone thought we were. But behind closed doors, the mask would drop. The affection evaporated, replaced by cold indifference or barely concealed irritation. It became clear that her affection was just another performance, a show for the outside world to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage. Even in our disagreements, I saw it. The arguments were never about finding a resolution or understanding each other. They were tactical maneuvers designed to assert dominance, to remind me of my place in this so-called contract. If I tried to express hurt or vulnerability, she would dismiss it as an overreaction, twisting the narrative until I began to question my own reality. Gaslighting, I realized, had been her subtle weapon all along. The more I observed, the more patterns emerged. Her care was reserved for things that benefited her directly, her career, her social circle, her hobbies. When I succeeded, it was met with lukewarm acknowledgement, a reminder not to outshine her. When I struggled, it was an inconvenience, a disruption to her carefully controlled environment. What stunned me most was how long I had been blind to it all. I had mistaken her practicality for partnership, her distance for independence, her manipulation for concern. The truth was, she had been crafting this narrative of a contract long before she ever voiced it aloud. In the quiet of our home, as she remained engrossed in her own world, I sat with these revelations, letting them seep into every corner of my mind. Each memory, each instance of her detachment, was another nail sealing the end of whatever we had once been. I wasn't just preparing legally and financially, I was fortifying my resolve, dismantling the emotional stronghold she had built around me. By the time I was ready to confront her, the love I once felt had eroded into a hardened resolve. This wasn't just a dissolution of marriage. It was a reclaiming of my own dignity, a refusal to remain a mere participant in her constructed contract. Every day, I watched her move through our life with the detached efficiency of a business executive managing a portfolio. And every day, I became more certain of the steps I needed to take. This contract, as she called it, was about to meet its end, not in a court of law, but in the quiet dismantling of the lies that had kept it alive. I had spent weeks preparing. Every document was in place. The legal side of things was handled with precision. I had made sure that when the time came, I would be in control, not her. She had built this marriage into something transactional, stripped of emotion and meaning. Now, I was about to show her what that really looked like. The moment had to be right. I needed her to be comfortable, unsuspecting. If I had learned anything from watching her all these years, it was that she never dealt well with losing control. I wanted her to feel it, to understand in the coldest, most practical way possible what it meant when a contract was no longer beneficial to both parties. So I waited. That evening, she was in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone as she leaned against the counter, the same detached posture, the same indifference she always carried at home. It was almost poetic how unaware she was of what was about to happen. I placed the neatly stacked papers on the table between us. She didn't even look up at first. "What's that?" she asked, still focused on her screen. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my voice even. "It's what you wanted." She finally glanced at the papers, her brow furrowing slightly. "What are you talking about? You said this marriage was just a contract." I slid the documents toward her. I'm terminating it. Her fingers hesitated over her phone, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something other than indifference on her face. Confusion, maybe even unease. She set the phone down. Wait, what? I tapped the papers. Divorce, legal separation, division of assets. Everything's outlined. My lawyer went through everything. It's fair, efficient, just like a contract should be. She stared at me, searching for a sign that I was bluffing, but I wasn't. You already spoke to a lawyer? Her voice had lost its usual certainty. I did. There was a long silence. She flipped through the pages, scanning the terms, bank accounts, property, debt, responsibilities. It was all accounted for. You're serious? It wasn't a question. I leaned forward slightly. Of course I'm serious. This is what you wanted, isn't it? A structured agreement, no unnecessary emotions, no romantic illusions. I tilted my head, watching her reaction. You made it clear this was just a contract to you. I'm just making it official. Her jaw tightened. That's not... She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You're overreacting. No, I corrected. I'm reacting accordingly. She sat back in her chair, arms crossed. And you expect me to just sign this? Just like that? I shrugged. It's up to you. We can handle this amicably, or we can drag it through the courts. But either way, this ends. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. You're really doing this? Yes. She picked up the papers again, but this time, I saw it. The way her fingers clenched slightly at the edges, the way her expression shifted from disbelief to something harder. This was the moment she realized she had lost control. She set the papers down, staring at me, trying to regain her footing. This is because you're angry. You're being spiteful. I shook my head. No, I'm just finally listening to you. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're making a mistake. I stood up, pushing my chair back calmly. No, I said, looking her in the eye. The mistake was thinking this marriage was anything more than a transaction. I turned, leaving her sitting there alone with the contract she had written long before I ever put it on paper. She didn't sign, not right away. I had expected that. For someone who had spent years treating this marriage as a transaction, she suddenly found herself unwilling to accept the terms when she realized they didn't favor her. Over the next few days, the silence in our house was different. Before, it had been the kind of silence born of indifference, of two people coexisting without connection. Now, it was thick with tension, filled with the weight of what was coming. She was calculating, strategizing. I could see it in the way she studied me, trying to gauge whether I was bluffing, whether she could still manipulate the situation in her favor. But she was playing a game she had already lost. It didn't take long for her to try the first angle, denial. One evening, she casually brought up weekend plans as if nothing had happened. We should probably get a reservation for dinner on Saturday, she said from across the room, her voice light, almost indifferent. I didn't even look up from my laptop. I won't be here on Saturday. She hesitated. What do you mean? I finally met her gaze. I meant what I said. This is happening. Her expression flickered briefly before she shrugged. You're being dramatic. I exhaled slowly, closing my laptop. Dramatic, I repeated. No, I'm being efficient. You, on the other hand, seem to be struggling with accepting your own logic. She crossed her arms. So you're just going to throw everything away? I shook my head. You already did. She had no response to that. The second angle came 2 days later, negotiation. She slid the papers back across the kitchen table, tapping her nails against the surface. These terms don't work for me, she said, her tone carefully controlled. I leaned back in my chair. They're fair, she scoffed. Fair? You think this is fair? Yes, I said simply. And if you don't, then we can let the lawyers handle it. But either way, this isn't up for discussion. Her jaw clenched. You're really going to do this the hard way? I gave her a long, measured look. There is no easy way. There's just the way things are. I could see the frustration building in her, the way she struggled to maintain the upper hand. She wasn't used to this. She had spent years believing she controlled the narrative, that I would always be the one bending, adapting, making things work. Not anymore. The third angle was the most predictable. Blame. That night, she didn't try to be indifferent or rational. She was angry. You're a coward, she spat. You don't fight for anything. You just walk away when things get hard. I let out a humorless laugh. I fought for this marriage longer than you ever did. She shook her head, pacing the room. You're just trying to punish me. This isn't about the marriage, it's about your ego. I stood up slowly, making sure she understood that this conversation was already over. You told me what this was, I said, my voice steady. You made it clear. I'm just giving you exactly what you wanted. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because we both knew the truth. She had spent years believing she could dictate the terms of our relationship, that I would always be there no matter how much she withdrew, no matter how little she gave. She had been wrong. The negotiation was over. She didn't say anything when I started packing. No protest, no last-minute pleas, no attempts to stop me. She just stood there, watching, arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. But I knew better. She was processing it in real time, the moment she had always controlled slipping away from her. I moved methodically, taking only what was mine: clothes, personal documents, a few items that held meaning for me. I didn't rush, didn't slam drawers or throw things into bags. This wasn't an escape, it was a decision, executed with precision, just like she had always preferred things. She sat on the edge of the bed as I zipped up my suitcase. "So that's it?" she finally asked. I glanced at her, my hand tightening around the handle. What else is there to say? She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. "You're really just walking away." I studied her for a moment, taking in the woman I had once loved, the one I had built a life with, the one I had spent years trying to understand, but now I saw her for who she really was, someone who had never been willing to give what she so easily took. "You already left," I said, my voice even. "I'm just catching up." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. I pulled my suitcase toward the door, pausing only once before stepping out. I turned to face her one last time, not with anger, not with resentment, but with finality. "You were right," I told her. "Marriage is just a contract." She stared at me, waiting for something else, some last-minute plea, some regret. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I walked out, and this time, I wasn't coming back. As I sat in the quiet of my new apartment, the city lights flickering through the window like distant stars, I finally allowed myself to feel it all. The divorce papers had been signed weeks ago, the assets divided with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. She got the house, her sanctuary of control, the place where she had built her version of stability. I walked away with my freedom, my savings intact, and the pieces of a life I could rebuild on my own terms. But freedom, I was learning, came with its own weight. It wasn't the triumphant rush I had imagined in those final days of planning. Instead, it was a hollow echo, a space where love used to be, now filled with questions I hadn't let myself ask before. The anger came first, raw and unfiltered, like a storm I had held back for too long. How could I have been so blind? For years I poured everything into that marriage, my time, my energy, my heart, believing that if I just tried harder, if I just showed up enough, she would see me, really see me. Not as a provider or a convenient partner, but as the man who loved her deeply, flaws and all. I remembered the small things, the way I'd surprise her with her favorite coffee on tough mornings, the notes I'd leave in her bag reminding her she was beautiful, the vacations I planned to reignite whatever spark we had left. And for what? She dismissed them as nice gestures, as if they were optional add-ons to the contract she had in her mind. The anger burned hot when I thought about how she had reduced us to that, a legal binding, nothing more. It felt like betrayal, not just of our vows, but of every vulnerable moment I had shared with her. But anger is exhausting, and beneath it lay something sharper, hurt, deep, aching hurt that kept me up at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. "This marriage is just a contract." Those 7 words shattered the foundation I had built my life on. I had loved her fiercely, from the day we met in that crowded coffee shop, her laugh cutting through the noise like a melody I couldn't ignore. I remembered our early days, the late-night talks about dreams and fears, the way her hand fit perfectly in mine. I thought we were building something real, something lasting. But to her, it was always transactional. The hurt twisted like a knife when I realized I had been alone in that love. She never reciprocated in the same way. Her affection was measured, given only when it suited her. How many times had I ignored the signs? The canceled dates, the dismissed conversations, the intimacy that felt more like obligation than desire. I hurt for the man I had been, hopeful, patient, willing to settle for crumbs because I believed in us. Now I mourned that version of myself, the one who had given so much to someone who never truly valued it. Guilt crept in next, uninvited and persistent. Had I contributed to this? Maybe I had been too accommodating, too quick to forgive her distance, too eager to maintain peace at any cost. I questioned every decision. Should I have confronted her sooner, pushed harder for counseling, demanded more from the start? The guilt gnawed at me during quiet moments, whispering that perhaps if I had been different, stronger, more assertive, she might have seen the marriage differently. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Guilt was just my mind's way of trying to regain control over a situation that had always been out of balance. She had chosen her perspective long before I ever realized it. Still, the guilt lingered, making me second-guess the divorce. Was revenge the right path? I hadn't screamed or lashed out. My revenge was cold, calculated, showing her the logical end of her own philosophy. But in the aftermath, I wondered if it made me as detached as she had been. Had I become the very thing I resented? Yet, intertwined with the pain was a strange sense of relief, like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Walking away felt like shedding a heavy coat I didn't realize I was wearing. No more pretending, no more forcing smiles at family gatherings, no more lying to myself that things would get better. Relief washed over me in waves when I cooked a meal just for myself, when I spent a weekend hiking without checking in, when I laughed at a joke without wondering if she'd approve. It was liberating to reclaim my time, my choices, my emotions. I no longer had to navigate her indifference or tiptoe around her moods. The relief grew stronger as I rebuilt. New friends who listened without agenda. Hobbies I had set aside to prioritize us. A career focus that brought fulfillment rather than just stability. In those moments, I felt alive again, unburdened by the constant effort of loving someone who didn't love me back. Pride emerged slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. I was proud of how I handled it, not with explosive anger, but with quiet resolve. I could have let the hurt consume me, could have turned bitter and vengeful in a destructive way. Instead, I chose dignity. I protected myself financially, emotionally, legally. Pride swelled when I looked back at the man who had walked out that door, suitcase in hand, head held high. I had shown her, and myself, that I wasn't defined by her view of me. I was more than a contract. I was a person worthy of real love, respect, and reciprocity. That pride fueled my growth. Therapy sessions where I unpacked years of overlooked red flags, books on healthy relationships that reshaped my understanding of love, and self-reflection that taught me to set boundaries unapologetically. I was proud of surviving, of not letting her words break me entirely. But loneliness shadowed it all, a quiet companion in the empty spaces. Divorce, even when justified, leaves voids. I missed the companionship, the shared routines, the inside jokes that only we understood. Loneliness hit hardest on quiet evenings, when the apartment felt too big, too silent. I wondered if I'd ever find someone who saw marriage as I did, a partnership of souls, not just papers. The fear of repeating the past loomed. Would I trust again? Could I open up without the scars holding me back? Loneliness forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, to acknowledge that while I was strong alone, humans aren't meant to be islands. It pushed me toward healing, joining a support group for divorced men, where stories echoed mine, reminding me I wasn't alone in this pain. Regret flickered occasionally, not for the divorce, but for the years lost. Regret for ignoring my gut instincts, for staying when the signs screamed to leave. I regretted the emotional investment, the dreams I tied to her that now lay shattered. But regret taught me lessons, to listen to my intuition, to value actions over words, to never settle for less than mutual effort. It transformed from a burden to a teacher, guiding me toward a better future. Hope, tentative at first, began to bloom. Hope that this ending was a beginning, that I could find love that was real, passionate, reciprocal. Hope in my resilience, in the man I was becoming, kinder to myself, wiser in relationships, unyielding in self-respect. As months passed, hope grew roots, nourished by small victories, a genuine laugh with a new friend, a promotion at work, a solo trip that reminded me of my independence. In the end, my emotions were a tapestry, anger woven with hurt, guilt threaded through relief, pride interlaced with loneliness, regret giving way to hope. The divorce wasn't just an end, it was a rebirth. I emerged scarred but stronger, no longer defined by her contract but by my own terms, and in that, I found peace.